The movie begins in the bustling city of Chicago, where crime rates have soared to an all-time high. News reports cover several incidents of shootings, burglaries, and murders. Everyone is affected, from children to senior citizens alike. In the midst of this chaos, we see two police officers in the aftermath of a gunfight. One of them is fatally wounded with multiple gunshots to the chest, while the other rushes him to the hospital. Upon arrival, trauma surgeon Paul Kiersey is called to attend to the injured officer. Unfortunately, before he can take any action, the cop passes away due to severe blood loss. The scene then cuts to Paul's home, where we meet his wife Lucy and their daughter Jordan. They seem to be very close to each other and often share all their secrets. Later, they attend one of Jordan's soccer games, where an annoying parent starts berating the referee. Paul playfully asks him to relax, but the man begins insulting him.
Shut the hell up, you bald bitch.
This angers Paul, but before he can retaliate, his wife interrupts and takes him away. Following the game, the Kiersey family goes out for lunch with Paul's brother Frank. They have a fun time chatting about their lives and work. After the meal, a valet named Miguel approaches them to retrieve their car. While doing so, he overhears the family talking about their upcoming plans. He soon realizes that they are filthy rich, and this consumes his mind with greed. So, later, as Miguel is handling their car, he secretly takes a photo of their address. You'd think a criminal would be able to memorize something like that. Cut to Wednesday evening, the Kiersey family gets ready for Paul's birthday dinner. But just when they're about to leave, he receives a call that he's needed at the hospital. Paul cannot refuse an urgent operation, so the dinner gets postponed for the next night. After he departs, the girls also head out for some shopping. Turns out they want to bake a birthday cake and surprise him. They'd forgotten to do it for tonight, so it's a good thing he had to go save lives. They return home with the supplies an hour later, but unbeknownst to them, a white van is ominously parked nearby. In the next scene, Lucy begins the preparation for the cake, while Jordan is upstairs. Everything seems to be going well until Lucy suddenly notices that the window is open. When she goes to close it, she finds dirty footprints inside the house. Alarmed, she quickly calls out for her daughter, urging her to come downstairs. But Jordan is already being held hostage by a masked intruder. Moments later, the leader of the group steps in and points his gun at Lucy. He calmly demands that she open the safe if she doesn't want any trouble. Having no other option, Lucy reluctantly complies and hands him all of their valuables. Meanwhile, Jordan is tied downstairs and left in the hands of two other accomplices. One of them tries to assault her, but the other guy intervenes and warns him to stick to the plan. This sparks a heated argument between the two. Giving Jordan an opportunity to grab a nearby knife, she quickly slashes one of the intruders across the face. Lucy also arrives at the same time and seizes the opportunity to throw boiling water at the man's face. But this turns out to be a grave mistake, as the enraged leader loses his cool.
Knives are fine, but water's not!
And ends up shooting both the mother and daughter. Following the attack, they are rushed to the same hospital where Paul is working. He gets to know that two severely injured patients have been brought in and goes to check. But as soon as he enters the room, he is devastated to learn that they are his own wife and daughter. Tragically, Lucy passes away shortly after arriving at the hospital, while Jordan falls into a coma. Later, Paul is visited by detectives Kevin Raines and Leonore Jackson, who are conducting an investigation on the case. They ask him several questions and finally come to the conclusion that the incident was a robbery gone wrong. Thanks, detectives. Anything else?
Drugs are bad.
All right. A few days later, Paul seeks help from a therapist to cope with the trauma. He also shares about his struggles to sleep, as he has been experiencing a lot of nightmares lately. In response, the therapist advises him to take proper rest and hands him some antidepressant pills. That evening, while taking a walk, Paul encounters two men harassing a woman. He tries to intervene, but ends up getting beaten up by the men. In the next scene, as Paul is watching TV, he comes across an advertisement for a gun store. Intrigued, he decides to explore the idea of owning a firearm himself. He later visits the store featured in the ad, where he is helped by a friendly staff member.
Hey partner, you looking to shoot him in the dick or the face?
She walks him through the process of obtaining a gun and provides him with essential information. However, Paul decides to take some time to consider his decision before walking away. On another day at the hospital, Paul is called upon to perform surgery on a gunshot victim. As they try to move the patient onto the operating table, a gun falls out of his pocket. Paul then discreetly kicks the firearm under the bed and retrieves it later without attracting any attention. Once home, he examines the gun and begins learning all he can about firearms. Over the next few weeks, he continues his work at the hospital during the day and dedicates his evenings to practicing shooting. One evening, Paul goes out for a walk, disguised in a hoodie with the gun hidden in his pocket. As he strolls through the streets, he unexpectedly encounters two men assaulting a couple. They beat up the man and steal his car, with his girlfriend still inside. But before they can flee, Paul fires at the car's tires, causing it to swerve and crash into a pole. The recoil from the gun injures his hand because he's good enough with it to shoot out tires, but not to remember that. But he manages to retrieve his weapon. He then shoots at the remaining attacker, killing him on the spot. In the aftermath of this incident, Paul rescues the woman inside the car before fleeing the scene. Unbeknownst to him, a woman at a nearby cafe has recorded the entire incident on her phone. The detectives arrive at the scene shortly after and are shocked by the violent nature of the killings. But the only leads they can find is that the killer was a white guy in a hoodie, Post Malone, and that his hand was injured during the confrontation. The following day, the woman who recorded the shooting uploads the video online, and it quickly goes viral. Paul watches the video and discovers that he's earned the title the Grim Reaper. I like that. Later, at the hospital, he tends to his injured hand before beginning his work. He then attends to a new patient, a young boy who was shot in the leg by a local drug dealer known as the Ice Cream Man. Paul learns that this guy is a violent man who shoots people for no reason, and he's now got a hankering for a scoop of mint chip. Therefore, he decides to take matters into his own hands. He coerces the boy to reveal the Ice Cream Man's address, then later heads there, disguised in a hoodie. As soon as Paul spots the man, he fatally shoots him in broad daylight before making a run for it. The news once again goes viral, and the hooded man starts being labeled as a vigilante. Some support his actions and call him a guardian angel taking down criminals, but others criticize him and argue that justice should be left to the authorities. Meanwhile, Detective Raines and Jackson arrive at the crime scene where the Ice Cream Man was killed. They find the same description of the shooter, a white guy in a hoodie. This time, Detective Raines rewatches the viral video of the Grim Reaper and realizes that the assailant is left-handed. Following this, Paul is called upon to attend to another gunshot victim at the hospital. To his shock, he recognizes the person as Miguel, the valet from the restaurant. He also notices him wearing his stolen watch in his hands. Paul still tries his best to save him, but the shady valet ends up passing away. Later, Paul finds Miguel's phone and discreetly unlocks it using his fingerprint. Upon examining the device, he stumbles upon a photo of his own address taken inside his car. This confirms his suspicion that Miguel was involved in the robbery and murder. Paul then delves further into Miguel's messages and discovers that the stolen items, including his watch, are being sold at a nearby pawn shop disguised as a liquor store. Later that evening, Paul heads to the said location and discovers the pawn shop at the back. When questioned by the owner, Ponytail, he claims that he was sent by Miguel. However, this raises suspicion, prompting Ponytail to alert someone named Fish. He then reaches for his gun, but Paul notices this through a mirror and swiftly stabs him in the hand. With Ponytail subdued, Paul holds him at gunpoint and demands to be led to his stolen belongings. At the same time, Fish shows up at the store. He rushes to the back and fires a shot at our hero. Paul somehow manages to dodge the bullet, but it ends up striking Ponytail, killing him instantly.
Oh, Fish, you bastard!
Following this, the two men engage in a violent altercation, which ends with Fish being shot in the leg. Fish don't have legs. Paul then forces him to reveal the person who killed his wife. Fish reluctantly blurts out that his friend Joe was the one who pulled the trigger. Paul tries to learn more, but Fish suddenly attacks him and turns the tables. He then proceeds to finish him off, but just then, a bowling ball unexpectedly falls from a shelf, hitting him in the head. This causes Fish to accidentally shoot himself, leading to his demise. Paul, lucky as a clam, seizes the opportunity to gather all the surveillance tapes and make his escape. However, during the rush, he accidentally drops his recovered ring. Upon returning home, Paul drills holes in the surveillance tapes to render them inaccessible before disposing of them. The next day, detectives Raines and Jackson visit him at the hospital. They show him a photo of Fish for identification, but Paul denies knowing the man. The detectives then reveal that he was found dead, and Paul's stolen ring was recovered from the crime scene. With this evidence, they believe it's only a matter of time before they uncover the rest of his team. Later on, Paul tracks down Joe at his auto shop and incapacitates him with a wrench. He then positions Joe underneath a car and secures it in place with a crowbar. Paul proceeds to torture him by making a clean cut on his leg and pouring brake fluid on the wound. And this brake fluid won't make Paul stop. Due to the excruciating pain, Joe finally confesses that a man named Knox arranged the entire scheme. Upon learning this, Paul pulls a chain to release the crowbar, and the car gruesomely crushes Joe's head. In the next scene, Paul receives a text from Knox instructing him to meet at a nightclub. Meanwhile, Frank pays a visit to Paul's home and accidentally stumbles upon his collection of firearms. This makes him realize that the infamous Vigilante is none other than his own brother. Elsewhere, Paul arrives at the nightclub, where he is eventually lured into the bathroom. He calls Knox, but hears the phone ringing in one of the stalls. Paul then shoots through the door, only to realize it was a trap. This exposes his identity, and Knox shoots him from behind, initiating a gunfight that leaves both men wounded. Chaos soon erupts, and people start fleeing here and there. In the end, Paul blends in with the crowd and manages to escape, while Knox contacts the detectives and provides them with a description of the assailant. He pretends to be an innocent guy who just came here to have some fun. Back at home, Paul uses his medical knowledge to patch up his gunshot wound. He then goes to the basement, where he finds Frank waiting for him. When confronted about his actions, Paul defends himself, arguing that someone must take justice into their own hands. Shortly after, they receive a call from the hospital, informing them that Jordan has finally woken up from her coma. Paul rushes to meet her, and the first thing he does is reveal that her mother passed away. Maybe talk about the weather first or something. A week later, Jordan is finally discharged from the hospital and Paul brings her home. This time, he legally buys a firearm to keep them safe. He knows that the bad guys are going to come after them sooner rather than later. One night, Paul sees someone run across their lawn, so he quickly hides Jordan inside a closet. It turns out to be none other than Knox, who has returned with 2 accomplices. Paul seems to have already made preparations, and he easily manages to kill the 2 goons. However, the cunning Knox somehow outsmarts him and shoots him in the shoulder. He then prepares to finish him off, but just then, Jordan arrives at the scene. The momentary distraction allows Paul to pull out a large gun from under the table and shoot Knox, finally killing him. In the aftermath, Detective Rains arrives at the scene for his usual investigation. He is already aware of Paul's true identity at this point, so he decides to help him out. Rains fabricates a story that Knox returned because he feared Jordan would identify him. They got into an altercation, and Paul ended up killing in self-defense. Now, with the case finally closed and the revenge complete, the father and daughter start living happily again. A few weeks later, as Paul is walking down the road, he notices a man stealing luggage from others. Having left his vigilante ways behind, he simply calls out to the man and pretends to shoot him with his finger.
Bang!